So we're going to begin the demo. Yes, I should have gloves on. I do not prefer to work with cake with gloves when I'm cutting because I don't like the grasp that I don't have on the cake when I'm cutting it. So I know that you guys all did this or should have done this in Bake Shop 3, but I wanted to demo for you guys the way that I cut, fill, crumb coat, and final coat a cake. Because everybody has a different technique, and I think it's important for you to see different ways to do the same thing, because one method may work for you and the other method may not. So this was the way that I was shown in culinary school. This is still the way that I do it. And you guys are welcome to do it the way that another chef shows you or the way that I show you, but I still wanted to just take the opportunity to show you both ways. Okay, so first thing I do before I used to do a lot of cake orders for my catering business, especially when I first started. And this is the same approach that I take whether I'm doing a buttercream cake, whether I'm doing a fondant cake, or even if I'm doing like cake jars or like smaller versions of like individual cakes. So the first thing I do is just make sure I have all of my mise en place. And later on, after we do the cakes, we can talk about scheduling and the way that you work out your weekly production schedule, depending on what your final product is gonna be, whether you're delivering the cake, buttercream cake, fondant cake, whatever it is. So the first thing I do is everything that you guys did up until now is make sure that your buttercreams are at the appropriate temperature, your fillings are at the right temperature, you have everything that you need, because once you start building, it's gonna take you more time to have to step away to get something, and then you're playing with the stability of your cake. So you really wanna make sure that you have everything good to go. So I have two types of buttercream here. This is the buttercream that I reconstituted. This is just plain Italian buttercream. And then this is our donation jar of all the combination buttercreams from all of you. Again, this is just a demo, so I'm not really concerned about the flavor. I just wanted to show you the technique. And then we have ganache. This is actually ganache that Chef Siciliano made in Bake Shop 2 yesterday that they had left over. So he left it for me so that we could cross-utilize product across classes. Again, saving money. And this is nice and spreadable. Okay, so I have my fillings and my buttercreams ready to go. I also have a small pint container so that I can scrape my crumb coat into this. I like to separate my what I call contaminated buttercream that has like little pieces of crumbs in it from my clean buttercream so that crumbs don't get into your final coat. Okay, so I have that ready to go. My clean pastry brush with my simple syrup. I'm gonna show you guys maybe a different way of simple syruping your cakes. My medium offset spatula, palette knife or your straight spatula, cake knife, okay, nice and flexible and long. I also have my bench scraper ready to go, and I just grabbed a different type of scraper so that you guys can see when I do my final coat and my crumb coat, the differences between the two and why I prefer one over the other. Again, my way is not necessarily like the only right way to do it, but I like to show you guys different tools so that you can decide which one works best for you. Okay, so I just have both of them ready to go. My side towel so that I can clean as I go, and then a garbage can right next to me, because after I finish cutting my cakes, I want to eliminate how many crumbs are on my station. Okay, so first thing I do is my cakes have been coming to temperature. They're not super cold, and I have them on a cake board. I prefer to cut my cakes on my station. Some chefs like to do it raised on a turntable. I don't like to do that. I like to do it on my station, and I have better control over it. I feel that this is a little bit too wobbly for me. Again, you may go into a cake business that tells you, no, always cut it up here. I prefer it on my station. Okay, so first thing I'm gonna do is I evaluate my cake, and I'm looking at the top. So my first goal is to cut the top off so that I have a flat top to work with before I start cutting my layers. I prefer thinner layers. I like for my cake layers as well as my filling layers to be the same width, so that when you cut into the cake, it is aesthetically pleasing. Okay? So that's always my approach. Again, this is kind of a classical approach to building a buttercream cake. There's a lot of videos on TikTok and Instagram of them basically like they cut the top off and then they stack the cake like thick like that with like a small layer of buttercream in between. For me, the ratio of cake to buttercream is not great. So, and there's no skill involved in doing that. You lop off the top and throw it on top of buttercream. There's no skill in that. And in reality, a cake shop is not going to be doing that. Okay, so this is a classical way of building a buttercream cake. So what I do first is I look at where my lowest point is on the side. So the way that this baked, my lowest point is right here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is using my knife, I'm just kind of like scoring right into the side where that cut is going to be, and then holding my knife straight, I rotate the cake and keep my knife basically in the same position, okay, with my hand flat on the top of the cake. Again, that's why I said I don't prefer gloves, because you don't get that tackiness on top of the cake. Okay, just rotating my knife all the way around. I have a little bit of a crust here that I'm slipping on, so I have to engage my knife a little bit more. I'm not cutting through, I'm really just scoring where I'm going to cut. So you're basically just marking a line first, and then I'm evaluating by rotating the cake how straight my line is. When you're first starting, if you're not very confident in having that visual, you can use a ruler and just measure all the way around. That's really, really important, especially when you're building a really high cake, like a wedding cake or especially a fondant cake. That's like several tiers. You want to make sure that you are level, because that means that your cake is stable. And the more stable it is, the better it will be for building a high cake. Okay, so I'm happy with the mark that I made. So now I'm going to cut through. When you're cutting your cake, you want to keep your blade straight. Okay, it's really common when you're first learning how to cut your layers. As you go, your knife starts to kind of like fall in like that, and then you end up cutting like a big divot or a slant into your cake. So getting a feel for your knife is really important, and how you're holding your knife, the balance of the handle as well as the blade. Cake knives are long and flexible for a reason. It's so that you can cut through cakes that are smaller like this, as well as a 10 inch, a 12 inch, a 16 inch, okay? Different than a bread knife, which is shorter and has, the teeth are a little bit more pointy and like aggressive. This one is a lot softer. The scalloping on this is softer and it's flexible for you to be able to work your way through. So I'm choking up on my blade and securing it with my back two fingers, so my pinky and my ring finger, and I'm choking up on it so that I have stability. I'm also being mindful of the balance. This knife has is like heavier in the back because it's thicker back here, so there's more metal weighing it down. So you want to make sure that you're holding it straight and that you're maintaining it straight as you're cutting. Okay. Also, a very common mistake when people are first learning how to cut cakes is, instead of doing long, like graceful sawing motions, people get very stressed out and they're just trying to cut through the cake quickly. So they end up kind of forcing the knife through instead of letting the serrated edge do what it's supposed to do. It's serrated because as you're sawing it, it's cutting it tenderly, nicely. instead of just forcing the knife through, and that's how you end up with like a lot of crumbs and kind of big pieces of the cake falling out. Okay, so my motion is I'm going to be doing long motions just like this, but I'm also rotating the cake in a circle as I'm going through. Okay, so I'm going to be doing this, but instead of cutting around like that, you're just going to rotate the cake. Okay, and your knife is going to come through following the line that you made, and that will guide you all the way across so that you have a nice flat top. Okay. So long motions. Okay. My favorite cake knife is actually, I think it's at home or it's in my cage. This is the knife that you guys get in your knife kit. I wanted to use the same one that you guys get so that you can see I don't have any special tools that you guys don't have. Okay, long motions all the way through the cake. Then I have a bowl where I'm going to be putting all of my extra tops. If you guys want to donate your tops to there. In a cake shop, so these cakes are still cold on the inside. That's why it was a little bit harder to get through the very center of it. I prefer to cut my cakes when they're room temperature. So I usually pull them out several hours before I cut. So you would never throw that top out. You would always be using that for something. We use it for linzer dough. You could use it as decoration on the side of your cakes. You use it for like Danish and crumb toppings on other things. You can make cake pops or whatever those things are called. Cake pops, is that what they're called?
Yeah.
So again, you never ever throw that out. That's edible waste. So I brush off my crumbs, I just evened out off that middle, and now I get down eye level with it to make sure that I am level. Okay, I look a little bit high right here, but it looks pretty good to me. Okay. Clean up your crumbs as you go. That will save you a lot of time and effort later on when you start your final coat, so that you don't get any crumbs in your buttercream. Okay, so I prefer my layers to be about not a 1/4 inch thick, maybe a little bit thicker than that. So I'm going to cut 3 layers out of this. What? Okay, so I mark the side of my cake of where my layers are going to be. Okay, then from there, okay, there's my marks. From there, I do the same thing. I hold my knife in that position. Again, you can use your ruler if you want. When I first started making cakes, I would mark however much that is. I would mark that in several places around the cake and then join the line all the way around. But after several years of doing it, you can eyeball it. Again, keep your knife straight. Rotate your cake. And you're just marking around the cake where you're gonna cut. Hopefully when you get all the way around, it matches up with the original line that you made. Okay. If you don't like the way it looks, you can go back around and make a new mark. Just remember which one you're supposed to cut on. If I wanted to go thinner, I would have gotten 4 layers out of this. The faces that I can see you all making are cracking me up.
That's 4 layers of cream.
lot of students ask me, like, after you graduate, like, are you a chef? Graduating with your degree in baking and pastry or in culinary does not make you a chef. However, there is an exam that you can take that certifies you as a chef. In that exam, no, I don't have that certification. If I did, I would have stripes on my collar. So if you ever see a chef with like flags that represent their country, that means that they passed that exam. They hold that certification. Part of that exam is doing a practical exam. So the practical exam is just a part of what you're going to be doing, like, as you go forward in this industry. That's why we incorporate it as part of your classes. Building a cake to specifications is part of that certification to become a certified master baker. I believe for that certification you do a cake like this. So they basically give you, like, you need to produce 2 pounds of Italian buttercream. You need to build a cake using these components that are this size for each layer, and then when they cut it, they measure everything. So this is not just an exercise of, like, do this because it's in the syllabus. This is actually a part of what would be the certification for the American Culinary Federation or any types of certifications like that. So, all right, and they watch you and they grade you throughout the day. So you have like 2 or 3 days, depending on what certification you're going for, and they grade you as you go, like sanitation, mise en place, use of time. So it's a little bit firmer as I'm coming through the center, so I'm being a little bit more forceful just because they're still cold in the center. Okay, so this cake is very cold on the inside. So I pulled the cakes out when I came in this morning. I got in a little bit later than I usually do. Your cakes are probably not going to be as cold as mine because yours are shorter. So, 3 layers. Serve it?
The triangles are the right thing. Like this.
Cut it in like this instead of like this.
Yeah, so it depends on how you're serving it, and like how many slices you're trying to get out of it. Like, I have a lot of customers that like love cake, and like when you have repeat customers, you get to know that if a typical 10-inch cake can feed 30 people, like I know a 10-inch is not going to feed 30 people in her family because they cut like huge portions of it, right? So like it would only feed 15 of them. So I think about that as how it's going to be served, who's serving it, and what kind of slices you're doing. Like, if it's for a family birthday party that's being served at someone's house, they're going to be cutting triangles, and they're probably going to be cutting them on the larger side. If you're doing a cake, like if I'm making a cake that's going to be served at a wedding or at a banquet, they're going to be cutting it like lengthwise this way, not wedges. In which case, they're pretty small slices, so that you're going to be getting a lot more servings out of it, and the cakes are all going to be uniform. I think it's easier to cut a cake to serve this way. It's like much easier, but it doesn't always look pretty. It depends. It depends on the environment. It depends on how it's going to be plated. You know, if like a slice of cake is meant to be plated as a slice, then that's going to dictate how you're going to cut it. Part of what I want you guys to learn in here is when you're decorating the cake, how to decorate it. Again, this is a classical approach, how to decorate it so that each serving has garnish on it and they're all the same. And then you score it on the top with your knife in the buttercream so that the front of house knows where to cut it. That's a very classical approach. And it's basically what would be in like a bakery case. So it depends on your end game. I don't want to say there's a right way or a wrong way because it depends. All right, so that's enough layers for me. So I cleaned up all my crumbs. And I'm going to start stacking. So now I'm going to grab my turntable, but I want to show you guys that I kept track of where my bottom was, because this is going to be, so I have 2 bottoms from 2 cakes. One is going to be the bottom of my cake, the other one is going to be the top of my cake, so that I have nice crisp 90-degree lines. I mean, honestly, the cake is cut so well that it doesn't really matter, but but if you run into an instance where you're like, oh my god, I really butchered that, your bottoms are going to help you give that beautiful finish on the top. So I use one on the bottom to make it stable, and then the other one is gonna be flipped, okay? So to secure this, I'm just gonna put a little bit of buttercream on the bottom, and notice that I'm using a board that is the same size as my cake, okay? That's really important. If you don't have a board the same size as your cake, cut it with your scissors so that it is the same size, because that's going to make a difference when you start to get it on your turntable, okay? So I just secure it a little bit with buttercream, okay? Smaller than the board, okay? You don't want it like coming out the side, because I'm eventually going to be going around with my spatula and I don't want it to get caught on the bottom of the spatula. So a little bit smaller than the board. So again, might be a little bit different than how you were shown to do simple syrup. So I don't prefer to use a bottle, because I think it's really easy, especially in the beginning when you're first learning how to make cakes, to get areas of the cake that are like doused in simple syrup and then other areas that have no simple syrup. You may not need to use simple syrup depending on how dry your cake is, how you want to incorporate flavor. You don't always need simple syrup, okay? But I wanted to show you guys the technique, so I'm going to be using simple syrup, and I want you guys to also do it so that you learn the technique as well, because it's not just a brush it on and then you're done, okay? So you're going to, I flavored mine with rum, and you're going to work your way, basically patting it on the cake from the edge, because the edge is going to be the driest part because it's where it baked. Okay, so you're going to go all the way around, patting it on so that it soaks in. I don't always simple syrup every layer. I usually do the bottom layer because, again, it's going to be the most dried out. Okay, so edge, and then from there you work your way in. So sometimes I alternate what layers my simple syrup goes on. Sometimes I only do the bottom layer. Okay. Also, keep in mind that your simple syrup, if you put too much on, it's going to repel your buttercream or your ganache if you're using it as a layer. So if it's not soaking in totally and you have like a lot of simple syrup on top, your filling is just going to slide across it. Okay. So we're going to use the ganache as a layer, and I'm using my, what is this?
Medium offset.
My medium offset. Thank you. Nice and spreadable. So I'm just checking the middle of this before I spread it on, just to make sure that it is spreadable. Okay, I'm putting this right in the center, and then I'm going to spread it out from there. So this is the beauty of using your turntable, is you turn as you go. I'm using my tip in the center, not this part. Okay, so tip, elbow comes up, okay, not down here. My spatula counterclockwise, but my turntable I'm turning clockwise. Okay, so they're basically going in opposite directions. And I'm spreading this, not all the way to the edge, but basically to the edge. Okay, you can leave a little bit of a gap, because when you put your crumb coat on, it's going to fill that in. So I'm not worried about pushing it all the way out. Okay, so I just basically spread it. If I think that I need a thicker layer, I just add more. Or you can remove some if it's too thick. Okay, so your goal is to spread it first. Then you go back and even it out. So get down eye level, and you can see that the middle is a little bit coned up. So I'm gonna even it by pulling it towards me. Okay? Okay, so I'm just checking to make sure it's even and that I don't have any low spots or high spots. Okay, again, my goal is that all of my layers are basically the same. I could add a little bit more on this, but since I'm stacking this pretty tall, I don't want to add too thick of a layer because it's going to squish out. Okay. So now my next cake layer on top, and you want to line it up so that it's straight. Sometimes I alternate my layers. Sometimes I do ganache and then buttercream. So I'm going to show you guys that. Okay, so right tool for the right job. If you have a baby cake, then you use a baby spatula. If you have a medium cake, you use a medium spatula. Okay, so again, I'm basically holding my offset in the same spot, and I'm just rotating the turntable. Okay, I always add a little bit more when I plop it on than I need so that I can take it off. It's easier for me to take it off than it is to add it. Make sure it's flat. Next layer goes on. Okay, so again, if you were going to simple syrup, you want to go from the edge. I like to use simple syrup as a different way to get flavoring into the cake. So if you wanted to just incorporate, like I really like putting Grand Marnier in simple syrup and in ganache because I think that it's just a really, really light, kind of elevated flavor without adding too much like bam orange, like in your face kind of thing. Okay, and the name of the game is to work cleanly. Okay, minimize your crumbs. So that's my top. I'm gonna finish it with this top. And before I finish it with my crumb coat, I'm gonna clean up anything that's squished out. Okay, so I just take my straight spatula at an angle, and this is where my pint container comes into play. Okay, so I would never want to scrape that back into any of my clean containers. Okay. So before I refrigerate this, I'm actually going to give it a crumb coat. Some people call it like a masking coat. And the crumb coat seals in. You see all these little crumbs? It seals the crumbs in on the bottom so that none of those crumbs get into your final coat. Okay? So you can use, I'm just using the filling that we used for the middle. And this is just supposed to be a really, really thin layer. Okay, it's not even supposed to count as like anything substantial. It's just masking all the crumbs and keeping them in one place. Okay. So again, using my pint container to scrape into, and then also applying it on the sides. So this also fills in the gaps on the side of the cake. So I'm just adding a little bit more on my sides. You can switch to a straight spatula for this if you want. You just want to make sure that you're cleaning all of your tools before doing your final coat. Right? This motion of having your arm up and over is going to feel very unnatural to you at first, and that's okay. So I'm scraping off the excess from the top, putting it back into my container, and then grabbing it with my tip, choking up on my spatula, and then getting all the way to the bottom. So the reason I want your cake board to be the same size as your cake is because look at my spatula, it's all the way on my turntable, so that you can fill in the bottom as well. That's helping me keep my spatula straight so I have straight sides. Okay, this is not meant to be an icing layer. It's just to seal in those crumbs. So especially where you see areas where you're like, ooh, those crumbs are really like the cake is jagged or cut from removing it from the pan, or your spatula dug into it. Okay? The cleaner your crumb coat, the better your final coat will be. Okay? Nice and thin. And then at the top, you see all those pieces. You're gonna come at it at a 45-degree angle. So you're gonna cut across and over. That's why I actually started at the top, so that I can have an edge of buttercream coming up like that so that I could clean it. Some people refrigerate this and then cut it. Nice flat top, so I'm going to go back around with my offset, clean that up. Then when I put put my buttercream on, I'll just make sure for my final layer. I'm a little bit domed in the center, that's okay. So I'll just make sure to build up my edges. It's getting hot in here, so the cake is falling on the ganache. Okay, so I'm gonna throw this in the blast freezer. The buttercream crumb coat that I put on is nice and chilled. So that means that it's holding the crumbs in that were coming off the cake. So now when I put my final coat on, all of those crumbs are gonna be sealed into that bottom layer, so none of them get into the final coat. This was Italian buttercream that was in the fridge this morning. So there were 2 containers. I melted one of them, put it in a cold bowl, whipped it, and then fed in pieces like this of the other container of chilled buttercream so that it would get it to a pliable consistency. But when I did that, there were a lot of air pockets in it, and that would make it very difficult to give my cake a really smooth finish. So right before I started this demo, I actually took this whole bowl, put it right over a direct low flame, like right on the stove, and I mashed out all of those air bubbles, and it made it nice and smooth. Okay? So my final coat, nice and silky buttercream. Okay, start by putting a lot on the top. I have a container of hot water so that I can finish this really, really smoothly. So I'm using my offset, and I'm going to spread my buttercream over the edge of the cake. I'm not worried about making it really smooth. The first thing I'm doing is just distributing the buttercream evenly and getting my top pretty flat. Okay, this is my clean bowl of buttercream. So since there's no crumbs in this coat, I can put it back into my clean buttercream. My goal is to make the buttercream on the top and the sides about 1/4 inch thick. So I'm applying a little bit of pressure here with an even spatula, like a flat spatula and straight. Notice that I'm using my offset for this, not my flat palette knife. Okay, so I'm getting that nice and flat. I'm not worried about it being smooth. I just want it to be flat. I made sure all of my tools were clean. I prefer a palette knife that's actually a little bit shorter. It's more of like a 7-inch. This is just a little bit too big for my preference. I have small hands, so I like a smaller palette knife. But this is good for taller cakes. Okay, now I'm putting a little bit more buttercream on my palette knife, and I'm attacking the sides. My knife was hot. What? Okay, so I'm spreading my buttercream. Again, not worried about evening it out. I'm just trying to get the buttercream on the cake. So I'm spreading the buttercream down from what came over the sides. That's an important step, because that buttercream cascading over the side is what's going to help me get a really crisp 90-degree edge. Okay, so I actually want it to be built up like that. Okay, so I'm just trying to get the buttercream on, and then I'll worry about smoothing it and making sure that it's even. If your cake was not built straight, this is going to be challenging for you because you're going to have parts of the cake that will be exposed and then parts of the cake that are going to be really thick with buttercream. And again, notice that I'm doing this not on a cake board. My cake is on a smaller cake board that's the size of the cake, but I'm going to transfer it to my larger cake board or onto a cake plate when I'm done icing. Okay, so you want your buttercream layer to be a little bit thicker right now because you can always take more off. Okay, so right now I'm just working on getting it on and working it down. Buttercream on your palette knife will act as like a barrier between your spatula and the crumb coat. Okay, so your buttercream is actually what's protecting the cake from your knife. Okay, so working on holding your spatula straight up and down. Notice I'm not using my offset. You want to use your straight spatula for this. Offset for the top, straight spatula for the sides. Other people may do it differently. This is just the technique that I use. Okay, so now I'm working on making sure that I have buttercream everywhere, especially on the bottom. Working on keeping my spatula straight up and down. That way my cake remains straight on the sides. I see a little crumb. That I'm removing immediately. So what's the big deal about crumbs? The big deal is that crumbs are like bunnies. Once you have 2, you have 4. And they just keep breeding until you have 100 crumbs. And you can't control them. Okay, so any little piece of crumb. This was leftover buttercream from someone else's class, so it's possible that there was some crumb in the buttercream. Okay, so as soon as you see it, you got to take it out, otherwise it's going to make more. I'm smoothing the sides just to make sure that they're straight up and down and that I don't have any streaks. I dip my spatula in hot water, clean it off, back in the hot water, and go back. And that smooths it. So it has a really beautiful finish. Your other option is using a bench scraper. I prefer to use a bench scraper because it has a handle for me to grab onto, and the entire thing is 90 degrees, as opposed to one of these that has curved sides. You can't use this edge to stabilize it against the cake because it's not going to be straight here. Okay, so in order to keep this straight, you need to keep it You need to stabilize it with this part up. When you use a bench scraper, you already can lean on this edge of it and it will keep this edge straight. Even though it has a handle, if you have a cake that's wide enough, you just need to make sure you keep this part of the handle off of the turntable so that it doesn't interfere with the cake. So you keep it at a little bit of an angle and keep the bottom of it flat on the turntable, and that will help make sure that your cake is straight up and down as long as your bench scraper is straight up and down. Okay, so this is a nice thing to use just to scrape off excess, but you're gonna end up getting those lines, okay? So that's where having a steady hand comes into play. And being able to clean up the sides with your palette knife. Okay? Buttercream sticks to buttercream, so if you don't take the buttercream off, if you don't clean it, you're not going to be able to smooth it at this point. So hot water, and that will repel the fat to give you a really, really clean finish. There's a lot of tools on the market right now. All kinds of cake scrapers and icing scrapers that you can use. Okay, you want to maintain even pressure all the way around for a clean finish. Then you come up to the top and you're going to swipe away, and that will give you a 90-degree edge. Every once in a while I clean my knife off. Okay, your goal is to have straight sides and a clean 90-degree edge where it meets. Okay, I'm not worried about the smoothness of the top right now. Then I can go back on the top. If you have a small offset, you can use the small offset for this. Am I what? Just by feel. Yeah. Okay, if I were doing this, like if this were for a bakery case, this would be fine for me. If I were doing this for a cake order, I would smooth the sides out a little bit more because I like to have really, really clean, smooth sides. I would actually probably replace this water. The hard thing about cakes is knowing when to walk away and knowing when you're doing more damage than good. And that's one of the toughest parts about being a pastry chef, especially when you're doing cakes. Because I think a lot of us are perfectionists by nature. But buttercream is not meant to be, you know, like fondant. They're two different finishes for different purposes. Buttercream can be smooth like fondant, but it takes a lot of time. So a lot of practice, using the right tools, and also knowing what's your end goal, right? Like if I'm gonna be decorating this on the sides, then it doesn't need to be super, super smooth and like glass, right? Okay, so that's my final coat. Okay. So the classical way of finishing this would be to score your portions with your serrated knife just by pressing in lines into the top so that front of house knows where they're going to cut. Once I portion it, then I can garnish it with my Swiss pearls. Again, very classical way of finishing this. And then I'm going to show you a technique of garnishing the bottom without using a buttercream border. Okay, so I had Mila prepping our grated chocolate.
Is that what this is for?
Yeah. Okay, so I have this down on a station so I can look down onto it. If you're tall enough that you don't need to do this, then don't do it. But again, working smarter, not harder. So before I score my knife into here, I'm just visualizing how many portions I can get out of this. Okay, so of course I'm going to start by cutting this in half. And I'm not actually cutting it, I'm just scoring my knife across the top. Okay. Yes, they make tools that do this for you, but this is a skill that you need to learn, especially visualizing how big a portion is. Okay, so if I were to do this into quarters, that would be too big of a slice. If I were to do quarters and then eighths, that would be too small of a slice. So this is where the challenging part comes in, where each of my quarters is gonna be cut into 3 even pieces, okay? Super challenging. Okay, so before you score each one, you're just going to visualize where you're going to do it. Okay, so if you make a mistake, it's okay, because you can come back in with a hot spatula and just smooth over that line that you made. All right, so now that I have it scored, now I know where to put my garnishes. This is very, very soft because I added dulce de leche to it. Okay? Yeah.
How far of space would you want between?
So this is gonna go in the center of each serving, but you're placing it so that it comes out to the edge of the cake. Okay, so when I start squeezing, I'm actually a little bit in. I just saw that. Yep. Okay, so there was a lump in that one, so you see how it didn't come out very smoothly. Okay, so back straight up and down and around. Now on each of those, I have brandied cherries. This is also a very common garnish to use on classic cakes because this was used a lot back in the day because they're soaked in alcohol, which preserves their shelf life. Okay, so these are soaked in brandy. I dried them so that they didn't have a lot of liquid on them when I added them to the cake. Yep, so I just had them draining on paper towels. Okay, adding some height, and again, ensuring that every piece has garnish. Right? Okay. Something that I also like to do is, if I have time, is to use like a chocolate cigarette to go from the garnish into the center. So it draws in to the very center, and then maybe using some like fresh fruit in the middle. Okay. So a lot of you struggle to get your cake off of the turntable, and that's super, super normal. So when you take your cake off of your turntable, you want to have your cardboard that you're going to place it onto. I'm not worried about there being a doily or anything on this because we're going to slice it anyway, so I don't have to worry so much about presentation there. So offset spatula, you're going to take your cardboard onto a flat surface. Now remember, there's a piece of cardboard under this cake that's the same size as the cake. So if I were doing a buttercream border, I would want to move it onto the whatever it is that I'm plating it on. Cardboard, cake board, or cake, ceramic cake plate, anything like that. But I'm going to show you guys how to garnish with some chocolate shavings. So this is ruby chocolate that I have. And before I plate it onto my cardboard, I'm just gonna show you to add a really nice border of chocolate on the bottom. You use an offset spatula and lift your shavings with your small offset and place that onto the cake. So holding the cake in your hand and then just touching it right to the bottom and rotating the cake in your hand as you go. And that's just a really nice way to finish a cake really simply. And again, showcases skill that you can balance a cake in your hand like this. That's pretty heavy because it has a decent amount of buttercream and a lot of layers. And it's just a really nice fine-tuned garnish rather than covering the entire side in like cake crumbs or chocolate curl. Okay, so you're just pressing it into the bottom. Okay. So I'm not going to finish the whole thing because you guys have to go to service, but I wanted to show you when you're transferring it onto your cake board, instead of trying to drop it on and being scared and not knowing how to transfer, bring your board a little bit off of your station so it's overhanging a little bit. Your offset goes between your hand and the cake, okay? So it goes under, so it's supporting the cake as well as your hand. To place the front of the cake onto the board so you center it. Remember, you have your offset there, so it's supporting you, okay? Lift from the offset. No, Ellie, I can't even look at your face right now. Okay, pull your hand out. Your offset is supporting it. Bring your cake board up. Slide your offset out. So, just a very simple, classic way to finish your cake without super getting into piping borders and stuff like that. Yeah, you want to cut it? Okay, so always cut with a hot knife, hot, wet knife. Okay, so I clean it, then I go back in. Dun dun dun. Dun, dun, dun.
She need a raise.
plus 4?